The word responsible in it, we try to bring moral finance. A lot of people said, we don't want morality in finance. Okay, because they associate morality with faith. And they want to keep faith as far away. So they went towards sustainable finance, which doesn't sound charged in any way. So we can't leave it at sustainable finance. We have to begin to call it responsible finance, so that there is an element of responsibility in what we are doing or saying. We have to take responsibility ourselves as to what is happening and what we are trying to do. So that's why we want to launch this responsible finance. And this is our first attempt today and tomorrow whole day, and see what are the different elements which are unfolding in our way. But I want to give you a number of pointers as to what can happen. From an economist point of view, until we change the behavioral pattern of corporations, we will not be able to address this. They will be able to peddle those products, whatever it is, and they will be able to run rough ride over any small regulations. They will lobby against the United Nations. And unfortunately, you have countries now which do not have much love left for the United Nations institutions. So we won't get very far. So we go to the source. If you study carefully, you will see that if an activity is sustainable in the long term, it can also yield decent returns. It is not a compromise. This morning we saw some of the asset managers explaining to us that they could invest in sustainable or ESG compliant assets and still deliver returns which are robust and comparable. The only thing is that sustainable returns take time. So let me give you an example of a forest timber operation. They could harvest the timber in two ways. They could just harvest the timber and leave the place as it is. Over a period of time, the forest cover will deteriorate. And you can see in Kalimantan, in Indonesia, and other places that there is still that element of irresponsibility, although it is changing. Or you could plant a tree for every tree you harvest, so that you have a cycle of whatever this life cycle of the tree, 30 years, 40 years, and you could have a continuous source of timber or whatever you require. Similarly, in all kinds of other activities. Instead of a 5-year cycle to pay back your investment, you now have a 40-year cycle, which might give you similar returns, but you have to be patient. So we need patient capital. And those of you who have done finance, the first thing they teach you is discounted cash flow. When you discount, the fewer number of years you discount, the better returns or ROIs you get, return on investments, right? And so investors, when they are evaluating, they say, the ROIs on this are more interesting, on this are not interesting, this is too long in the future, God knows what is going to happen in the future. So we have to change that paradigm and bring patient capital in. Unfortunately, it is not that easy as you see, because capital markets are very geared to short-term returns. Now look at what's happened to Cadbury's. Cadbury's was one of our signature companies. Making chocolates, yes, I understand. But still, a very responsible company. Cadbury's had just reached a state where they had designed to source all their cocoa from fair trade operators. Fair trade, as you know, it's a very elementary attempt to reward the producer of the raw material adequately. Because if you look at, for example, if I look at a can of Coca-Cola, right? What is the cost in the market, Arif Bhai? Coca-Cola can? 60p. Okay, 60p. 40p if you go to a discounter, right? What is the cost of the cola nut in there? $1p. And water, nothing. And sweets and sweeteners, say 5p altogether in the whole thing, right? So where does the 55p go? Supply chains, distribution, royalties, what we call in economic terms services. So if that guy who is only getting 1p for the cola, you squeeze him down, he has no say in the whole thing. You cannot sabotage the product. It is a very, very helpless position. So what fair trade begins to think about is that how to reward that person sufficiently so that they could have a decent elementary lifestyle to continue. Similarly for cocoa and so on. So Cadbury's had nearly devised a structure for sourcing all their cocoa from fair trade farms. Clearly that meant that they would have a period of stagnant profits by the time they transfer that into a sustainable network and so on. And what happened? Up came Kraft, pounced on them and said, we could deliver better returns than this, scrapped all that nonsense, according to them, took them over and bought the family out. Recent case is Unilever. Mr. Paulson of Unilever, chairman of Unilever, or MD of Unilever, has 10 years now working to make Unilever a much more sustainable company in terms of both resource use, product structure, product sourcing, all kinds of things across. And he has managed to deliver not bad results, good results. But there comes another version of Kraft and said, look, we can speed this process up, right? We don't need all this nonsense. We can extract value from this company immediately. And the markets, capital markets, will allow them to buy Unilever, if you like, and do that. Because they will say, we need returns. We don't need to talk about all these things. So even now, patient capital, visionary managers are not finding it easy to operate in a space where they can begin to address these questions, right? However, the circumstances are changing. People are beginning to take note because the imperative of not doing anything is beginning to dawn on us. So, for example, the UN hosted negotiations on the carbon emissions. It says that if we do not do anything, another 3 to 4% increase in the carbon levels will probably result in disaster in large parts of the world. This morning we saw this one photograph from Greenland showing that over the ice cap there is about 3-4 inches of water now at this point in time, which never used to be the case, showing that the whole thing, polar caps can melt, and parts of our east coast also are threatened with submersion from that. Okay, so now having dilly-dallied with economics here, there, trying to deny it or just marginalize it, we are faced with a very stark choice. We have to do something. The good news about that is that for the last 20 years, we have seen the development of renewables in one form or another. 3 kinds of renewables: solar power, where it is possible, wind power, where it is possible, and tidal power, where again it is possible. Last month, for the first time in the UK, all our domestic energy needs were generated by non-coal sources. So, literally, if we stuck to that path, we could take out coal, which is a much more bigger source of carbon emission than many other, than gas or oil or so on. Okay? And in recent bids for projects, especially in Scotland, renewable companies have been able to bid against gas and other companies at prices which are comparable. So they don't need subsidies to do their job. They could do that without subsidies. Clearly, if scale takes on, then this will become more and more possible. And we could do without a lot of fossil fuel use. Now, there is a discussion that we shouldn't be subsidizing renewables and so on. I think this is only for people who are not informed. Just total up the subsidies we give to fossil fuel producers, and they will dwarf anything you are imagining to give to renewables just to start them off, right? I mean, if you want to convert a home to renewable usage, you have to subsidize, you have to incentivize the home in some way. But then, for the whole lifespan of that house, you have a very, very nice energy-producing home without pollution. And so these are the kind of activities we need to look at, we're beginning to look at. The only remaining challenge we have in renewables is that apart from some countries, some situations, they are not a 24/7 source of power. So you don't have sunlight at night, or in the winter we hardly have sunlight here, and so on. Wind is not blowing all the time, tides the same. You can supplement this in two ways. One is to create better storage so that when sun is available or winds are available, you generate more than you need and you store it. So storage technology is one thing which is beginning to be looked at very seriously. For example, if you look at electric cars now, the range of these cars is going up from 50 to 100 to 200, maybe 300 miles you can do without recharging your battery. 300 miles is probably enough for 80% without charging. Of course, you can charge of the usage. So you're getting there. Battery technology is now the key to doing that. The second one is transmission losses. When you transmit power, you lose quite a lot. Not as in India, Pakistan, or Bangladesh, or other countries, Philippines, by people tapping into your line and tapping on, no, but just transmission losses. Again, a lot of technological developments have happened which allow much more efficient transmission, especially DC transmission, which the Chinese have developed over long distances. So again, that's in place. And more research on this will bring more benefits in that direction, one can see. Removing restrictions on, for example, the location of wind turbines. 2 weeks ago, I was saying even the Conservative Party members are saying we should not have restrictions on these things in our backyards because that's where energy will come from. They are harmless things. They just look ugly sometimes, in our view, on the meadows and so on. But we don't have that much choice. Because if you look at the alternative, one alternative touted is nuclear power. Yes, it is clean at its inception stage. First, it is expensive to build. Safety-wise, we have to be exceptionally careful. But there is a sting in the tail. disposal of nuclear radioactive waste is not a lifetime job. It is a job for all generations to come. Radioactive waste doesn't sort of become harmless over a period of time. So that burden will have to be taken by the state. So we will be subsidizing nuclear power to a large extent in taking over that and looking after that. We might bury it under the seas and so on, but we are just storing future problems. So even nuclear power is a short-term gap until we begin to generate and make things from truly renewable sources which don't require this. Okay. Still, the problem of course, global distribution of these things stays. We can begin by giving example, but we cannot dictate to other people what they will do. So the global forums, like the one climate change we had in France, and I think in 2020, we are thinking of hosting the global forum here, trying to get commitments, some soft and then slightly harder and then hard commitments from countries that they will adhere to these emission levels in their markets. And so the whole thing will begin to add up. Unfortunately, the Americans are not playing ball at the moment on that. They say, we can't be limited by other countries. We can do what we like, America first. And I remember those days, early 1980s, we were saying to the Americans, if you lower your air conditioning temperature by 2 degrees, we can accommodate the whole demand for these gases from the Chinese. How can you talk about us lowering our air conditioning? 2 degrees is nothing. But that's unfortunate. But I think it's only a question of time before many nice and decent American people will also see sense and in turn get their leaders to see sense. However, and of course, you will have seen that our country here has taken 2 steps which have been quite pivotal, quite pioneering. The first one was taken during the tenure of Gordon Brown as Chancellor. Finally, he agreed that the UK will give 0.7% of its GDP to development activities, including encouraging all these kinds of things. Because UN calculations after the limits to growth thing showed that if every rich country puts 0.7% of their GDP into these activities, we can begin to see the end of poverty globally. So we were fortunate to have Gordon who understood this, and it's now legislated. Of course, one of the discussions in the prime ministerial candidates is that whether to remove that and not think about it. So anyway, I hope not. I hope we can. They have begun to dig into it. They say security is part of development and this part of, so they have eaten half of it away. So it's not something which is sacrosanct, but we need to build that constituency to help that. The second thing which has happened because of the impending circumstances and because of our wish to hold the 2020 summit here is that we have become one of the first developed countries to commit to zero carbon emissions by 2050, which might be late, but anyway, it is a hard commitment. Now it has to be followed through. What is required to deliver that? Development of appropriate technology, products, and so on and so forth, right? And that obviously will also bring the question of finance into these things. Finance which encourage these activities, very much like the SDGs. We might develop a framework where we say that any financing must show how much they will contribute to getting that target done in this country. If not, don't finance it. And happily, the Governor of the Bank of England and the other financial authorities are beginning to latch on to that and say to banks and others to price this risk into their lending models. This is one of the ways it will begin to change. Yeah. So hopefully, other countries will be also encouraged to follow and do some things which also help the global effort. But At the end of all this, we come back to the limits to growth. Can we sustain this level of consumption for the 8 billion people of the world, or for the 10 billion people of the world in the next 20 years? If not, we have to see to change our lifestyles. One of the biggest contributors to this problem is the consumption of meat. As many of you who are economists will know, that as you become more developed, you eat more meat, and you consume more grasslands to produce meat. Meat is a very, very inefficient conversion of protein for consumption. There are other ways to do it by not eating meat. So meat eating habits, things like that will have to change across. Usage of cars, global travel, number of airline passengers all over the world multiplying and multiplying again, bigger and bigger airports coming up. We're taking a flight at the whim and say, okay, I'm going to Belgium today and I'm going to Amsterdam tomorrow and here and there, not realizing my contribution to the thing. So all those things will need to change. The time now has come for each person to make a contribution from their own lifestyle, and then from each person in their workplace or in their place where they are contributing to thinking, to think through these processes and then feed them into finance. And we see it is not without results. We see that day after day, different funds are announcing that we will not invest in fossil fuels. For example, the university endowments and so on, Norwegian Wealth Fund and so on. As more and more do that, people who are producing polluting products and technologies will not get access to finance. And therefore, there will be a spiraling effort to direct finance towards activities which will enhance this. It is a long road ahead. This is just a vision. But I'm glad that the UK is quite advanced in this thinking. Whether our companies will allow our government to deliver it, that's another question, but that is our job. So I think with that, I would like to conclude these remarks. This is how the sustainability paradigm has built up, imperative now, and now the challenge is for the world to deliver on that imperative, which will bring many, many benefits which we did not have before. Thank you very much. I don't know if we should take questions or go to tea and then come back to the next session. What is people's feeling? Are there any burning questions? Okay, everybody, yes, sorry. Alija, can you bring a mic here, please, in the front? Yeah, here in the front.
Thank you very much for your beautiful discussion. Actually, you have referred the Malthusian theory of population, and I have written a research paper on Malthusian theory of population in 1997. So one thing just I remembered it, so I thought I should not miss here.
Please.
I should share with you people. And secondly, you have told that need to change the lifestyle, because Quran also says to change the lifestyle, because Quran says the destruction prevalent in the world is the consequences of the human mischief. Zarul fasad fil barri wal bahri bima kasbat aydin nas. This is the, we can say, the message, meaning of this verse. So population, actually, many people, they have perceived that poverty is because of the excess population. Those who have read and those who are the economists, have studied economics, Malthusian population theory. But what I perceive that we cannot blame entirely population. There are some other issues also. And the issue which we have find, that is the mismanagement of resources or the wastage of resources. Even in this small program, I have seen in hall during the lunch time, one waiter was talking, these are the Muslim people and they are wasting the food. So I have seen that the people, they don't care it that. And I have just seen, 2 weeks before, I have Googled some data about the wastage of food. So I have found there are several countries, they are wasting the food. So I think the God has created everything in proportion. So how it could be mismatched? So there is a not mismatch. I think this is the misuse of the public resources, and because of that we are facing the problem. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much for that. There are two ideas here. One is what we have called israf, which is not actually wastage. It is abuse. The inner meaning of israf is abuse. So part of it is wastage. Now this is very much part of the ethos of Islam, that israf is not permissible. And so you are right, that we have to think of even, am I leaving half my apple uneaten upstairs? From there to bigger things, all right? Or wasting, we know, for example, how much food is wasted in homes, which is bought and then not used and then thrown away, and so on, by supermarkets, by here, there, all kinds of things. The other one, which is also equally important, is called khilafah. Not khilafah in the sense of a caliph, but khilafah in the sense of stewardship of resources. Allah says, I have created you as stewards upon the earth, which means guard the resources. And what I think George Latham, who was talking in the morning, said, this is that use the resources of today in a way that you do not compromise the use of them by future generations. Use them mindfully. And this is, of course, stewardship. You are quite right, yes, of course. And this is what I mean by behavioral change. Behavioral change, disposable cultures. If you go and buy, say, a burger. First of all, the burger is made of things, let's leave that on one side. You have a box, and then he puts it in a bag, and then you put it in another bag. So how much are you wasting for just a small thing like that? And then you find the same bag and the same box on the street or in the dump or garbage cans. And if you think about it hard, you see, my God. Or just give you a closer example. We went to Hajj last year, right? Those of you who haven't been or who don't know Hajj, this is the annual pilgrimage. About 3 to 4 million people come. 2 million from outside, 2 million from inside the Saudi Arabia. Every sanctuary, every haram has got these banks of water and plastic cups. And I was making a calculation that between us, we were probably throwing away 10 to 15 million plastic cups a day. In Hajj, which is the most sacred of the rituals, right? 15 million times 20 days, where is it going? Into a dump mountain, plastic mountain, or being dumped onto Thailand or Malaysia or wherever? These are the kind of things we need to think about. Whilst convenience is one thing, responsibility is another.
Evolution of sustainability through time. My question is, with your experience, if you were to cast an eye to the future, would you say that with the rise of nationalism and also with the apparent failings of the nation-state model, would it be perhaps a more innovative approach to think about human governance much more locally and much more communally, and therefore bring about sustainability to those new frameworks of governance, and thereby creating much more